Welcome to Seasoned. I'm Marisol Castro.
And I'm Chef Plum.
We're celebrating the foods of Passover this week.
Later in the hour, we visit Rein's, a New York-style Jewish deli celebrating 50 years in Vernon. And we talk with Liz Alpern of the Gefilteria in New York. Liz is on a mission to reimagine Ashkenazi Jewish food.
But first, we'll learn some of the history behind the symbolic food on your Seder plate. Our first guest is Joan Nathan. Many people consider her the authority on Jewish cooking around the world.
Joan is a legend, first of all, and the author of 11 cookbooks, including Jewish Cooking in America, Joan Nathan's Jewish Holiday Cookbook, and her latest, King Solomon's Table, a culinary exploration of Jewish cooking from around the world.
Joan Nathan, welcome to Seasoned.
Well, thank you.
We're going to dive right into a history lesson.
Okay.
Because we want to get into all the nuances regarding the Passover Seder. But let's start at the beginning. Who was the biblical King Solomon, and how does he represent a cuisine that is more than 3,000 years old?
I guess he was really the first gourmet. He was the king who was building a temple, and he had something like 700 wives. So these wives would bring, according to the Bible, they would bring spices and foods they all lived around the land of Israel. And he also tithed each tribe, there were 12 tribes of Israel, for each month to go out to the then known world. They were wooden boats called day boats, D-O-U-G-H. And they went out, let's say, to India, and they would find spices, and they'd find jewels, and they'd find other things. They'd bring them back to adorn the temple, and then people would try them. And I kept imagining what it was like if all these women were around in the temple in Jerusalem. They would be outside and they would be cooking. There were no apartments the way we have them today. So all these fabulous aromas would come from everywhere. Going out and finding foods and bringing them back is the way that I think of him as a real gourmet. For example, I was in India a few years ago. And in the synagogue, it said that the first Jews came there at the time of King Solomon. And I realized, wow, they found these ginger and cinnamon, which they also found in now Sri Lanka. And they'd bring them back to Jerusalem and bring them into the cuisine. Different spices were used. Cinnamon is something that gives you energy. So it wasn't just to eat. They became medicine for people. And by the way, it was just the then known world. So it was part of the Mediterranean and it was the East, because don't forget, everything came from the Far East.
Joan, as a private chef, and before I ask questions, I have to just say thank you. I've worked with many Jewish families over the years, and you and your videos have taught me how to cook Passover food and what a Seder plate is. I had no idea, and I've watched tons and tons of content from you, and that's how I learned as a private chef. So,
that's great.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
You.
You've been called a food detective for your research on this topic. What are some of the foods that you uncovered, and where did those foods come from?
What I'm really most interested in are the really old foods. I mean, not, ones that you want to throw out from your refrigerator, but like chickpeas. Let's take chickpeas. Yeah. Chickpeas have been around for something like 12,000 years. They were the first protein of antiquity, and they will be the protein of the future. They need very little water, and they came from all around the Middle East. Chickpeas are mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is like 2,500 years before there was Judaism. They found 12,000 years ago some chickpeas in Jordan. So that whole area, they found them. And one of the things that I did when I was researching this book, I found these tablets at the Sterling Library at Yale University. And there's a recipe for borscht there.
Wow.
Not the borscht that we know, but there was similar to that. From these Babylonian texts, you learn about what people ate. You also learn about what people ate from the Bible. And if I knew more about, Buddhism and the Buddhist text, that's because much of Judaism, which is, all of us in the Christian Judaic world and Muslim world, stemmed from Judaism. But Judaism, really, a lot of the food stemmed from Buddhism and from the East. And foods of the East came early on to ancient Israel. And then they went from there, to the Western world.
Joan, it's what you're speaking to really, because you've mentioned India, you've mentioned Muslim society, Christian Judaic society, and you're really talking about the Jewish diaspora, which I think a lot of folks don't really know about. And clearly you've done your research and you're investigating and you've met tons of people throughout your career and throughout your research and travels. And I wonder if there is a particular person or a family that really struck you and their story and how that influenced your latest book.
Well, there are so many.
I'm sure I know. When you let out that sigh, I was like, she's probably got 17 swirling around in her head.
Okay, I'll tell you one in particular. I have this one woman in my book, Paola Fano. She's an Italian. Her maiden name was Modigliani, but she's not related to the painter. However, she's from an old Italian family. And I knew that one of the great Italian recipes are carciofi alla Judea, which are artichokes that are fried. So she showed me how to do them in a modern way. And then I went to old texts and I learned that before there were artichokes, there were all kinds of thistles that people would eat, not fresh, but fried, because you ate what you could. Don't forget, there's nothing new under the sun. That's one of the things that King Solomon said. But today we have everything that the world has right here. But we're not going to in the future. We're going to have to be much more careful and use many more herbs and grasses and grains. So that's why I'm going to Israel next week, just before Passover, to look at the ancient grains. I'm really curious about some of the ancient grains, because the einkorn and the emmer wheat is the mother of wheat, and they all are there being used, and there's a lot less gluten in them. So there's all kinds of experimentation going on. So I feel as if the past can teach us about the present and what the future should be. And that's really where I am with people and people that have long lineages. I mean, I love it because they can teach me so much about the past. And I get such a high from some of these interviews.
In the book, you write how amazing it is that sometimes it even takes your breath away. When gathered around a Passover table, we think that Jews all around are sitting around similar tables across the world, eating symbolic foods absorbed from culinary traditions developed over thousands of years. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that for us?
Well, it happens to me every year. I want you to know. And it's really hard putting together Passover Seder. But what it is it's like one of the oldest theaters known to mankind. Here you're taking a story from the Bible, the Jews going to Egypt, thinking that they would be able to live in Egypt. They became slaves in Egypt, and they went back their journey back to the land of Canaan. And this is the defining moment of Judaism, where the Israelites became a Jewish people. And the reason that you tell the story is that you want it to be remembered, but you want your children to remember it every year. So I have a very big Seder. I have about 40 people, and I do all the cooking myself.
Wow.
And I love having these old recipes, old haroset recipes. Oh, let me just say, first of all, there are only 3 recipes that you really should need to have, and it's in the book of Exodus. It's maror, which are bitter herbs, unleavened bread, and you're supposed to have, according to the Exodus, but it's not done, is a lamb roasted outdoors and eaten before dawn. And most Jews do not eat lamb at Passover for the Seder because they want it to be, when the temple is rebuilt, they can have it. It's symbolic of the burned temple. To keep children awake, you need a lot of symbolic foods, a lot of tricks to keep them awake. So there's a Seder plate. And on the Seder plate, you have haroset, which is not part of the ancient Seder at all. And that was brought in by the Greeks. And haroset are nuts and fruit that are sort of pounded together to remember the mortar when the slaves were building buildings in Egypt. Then there's parsley, which really is a sort of a dual thing. You dip it in salt water, not only to remember the enemies that were dead, but also it's a sense of spring. Then there's the roasted lamb bone. And that is something that, again, reminds you of the destruction of the temple. There's egg. Don't forget, it's close to Easter. There were a lot of eggs in the springtime, and they were not necessarily chicken eggs either, by the way, more likely duck eggs. And that was in memory of the festival sacrifice. And then, of course, there was matzah, which I think it means the bread of slavery. But it's also, some people think that the Jews learned about yeast in Egypt, and they wanted to leave everything that was Egyptian behind. So they decided to make their bread quickly out of just flour and water and leave the yeast. Of course, they didn't really leave the yeast. So these were all symbolic things on the Seder plate. And you have to have all these things. And then, of course, there's wine. And there's a Haggadah, which is like the story of Passover. And each family has their own story that they tell. And one of my favorite things, which is something that we don't necessarily do at my Seder, we take the Seder plate and you put it over, this is a Moroccan custom, over each person's head so that each person will feel that they personally are going from slavery to freedom. You know, that's pretty amazing. And you try to bring it to modern day. And you can imagine this year, everybody is going to be doing something with Ukraine and Russia at the Seder table.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's such a powerful image that you do around your Seder plate. And I think this year will obviously be very different. And to hear you talk about the specifics of the Seder plate and the Passover Seder table, I wonder if we could just go back, because I think commercially, if you're not Jewish, you know you're around the time of a Jewish holiday because your grocery store has matzahs front and center.
Right.
Whether you're Gentile or Jew, I'm a quarter Jewish, so I'm good with both sides. Tell us about the importance of matzah. How does it figure into the meal? And what is your favorite way to eat matzah?
First of all, matzah, for Passover, you're supposed to empty your house, according to the Bible, of fermented foods for 8 days, excuse me. And I just put them in the garage, but some people traditionally sell them to a neighbor and buy them back afterwards. So that means you can't have any bread. So matzah becomes part of the holiday. And for me, you know, I know that you can buy Passover cereal, you can buy all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. I don't use it. I like to go back to what was, and all these, we have a heritage of old recipes, and that's when I pulled them out. So, you know, it might drive my kids crazy, but we have a matzah pizza where they put tomato and cheese on it and put it in the toaster oven, or we'll have use matzah as macaroni and cheese. They used to do that. They don't do that anymore. My grandchildren will do it this year. But for the most part, we use old recipes, or we do something called matzah brai, which is, you know, soaking matzah in water and then stir frying it with eggs, or I scramble them, and I like a savory. Everybody has a different way of making matzah brai. You know, sometimes you put smoked salmon in it. Sometimes I put mushrooms in it. It's always good. My mother-in-law I don't know why she did this. She'd take one whole sheet of matzah. And it used to be, by the way, matzah was round. And if you get shmura matzah from the Lubavitchers, which you can get, costs a lot of money, but you get these round matzah that were baked in ovens. They have matzah ovens in every community. If you go to Europe, in the synagogue, you'll find a matzah oven, like in Carpentras in France, way down underneath like a 14th century oven, or I saw one in Sicily. And they'll also have a place to kasher their meat in these communities. I mean, it's really incredible that this has lasted so long. And so you make the matzahs in the oven all over the world until a man named Manischewitz and some other people in France manufactured, at the age of industrialization after the 1850s, they manufactured these square pieces of matzah. So that's what we all know. And then you crumble them up, you know, for matzah brai, or before Manischewitz matzah meal came into being, you'd crumble them up and make your matzah balls, which were knädel coming from German Jews, for your chicken noodle soup. Mm-hmm. So it became part of the Seder, but of the Passover 8 days, but also you realize that every recipe has been changed or affected by whatever country Jews lived in. Mm. Therefore, like Jews, some very religious Jews will not use matzah in anything other than eating it with butter or cheese. It's real hardtack for them. That's what the Lubavitchers, because they feel that if you put it in water, it might ferment a little bit. So they don't have matzah balls for Passover or other things. And then Jews from different cultures use it differently. Like Greek Jews will just break the matzah up in their soup. It might be an egg lemon soup. German Jews will make these matzah balls, and so will East. And then these recipes went from Germany to the East. So to Poland and Russia. And, as Jews were kicked out of places, they brought with them what they had, and they adapted the cuisine to the cultures. And I'll give you a great example of adaptation. Jews were in El Salvador, for example, from Eastern Europe. So they had made potato pancakes in Eastern Europe, and they made yucca pancakes in El Salvador with a cilantro cream.
I love it. Joan Nathan, it has been such a joy and pleasure to talk to you. I feel so much smarter now. You are unbelievable. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished, really, truly.
Well, thank you, and have a happy Passover.
That was Joan Nathan. She's an authority on Jewish cooking and a James Beard Award-winning author. Her latest book is King Solomon's Table. Joan shared a recipe from the book for flourless chocolate cake, and you can find it at ctpublic.org/recipes. Stay with us. Later in the hour, Chef Plum talks with the manager of Rein's Deli in Vernon about what makes a great New York-style Jewish deli. I'm Marisol Castro.
And I'm Chef Plum. Coming up after the break, if you think gefilte fish is a Passover dish to be tolerated as opposed to enjoyed, our next guest will change your mind about that.
That particular recipe really tastes like spring, even though it still has that old world flavor of gefilte fish.
This is Seasoned. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Seasoned. I'm Marisol Castro.
And I'm Chef Plum.
In Joan Nathan's Jewish holiday cookbook, published more than a decade ago, Joan wrote, quote, "Surely no holiday food is more Jewish than gefilte fish," end quote. So we wanted to know more about it.
We found the perfect person to talk about the Jewish staple, but this is not the gefilte fish of decades ago.
Our next guest is Liz Alpern. Liz is the co-founder of the Gefilteria in Brooklyn, New York. She's co-author of the book The Gefilte Manifesto, New Recipes for Old World Jewish Foods. Liz is on a mission to reimagine Ashkenazi Jewish food.
Liz Alpern, welcome to Seasoned.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
So for people who may not know, what is gefilte fish?
Gefilte fish is an appetizer. It's a dish that you would serve at a meal, but it is not a main dish, so I think that's worth noting. It is traditional in the Ashkenazi Jewish table, and the Ashkenazi Jewish table refers to Central and Eastern European Jewish origin.
Okay.
The largest chunk of Jews in the United States are Ashkenazi Jews, so they can trace their roots back to Central and Eastern Europe in some way. Their family probably spoke Yiddish. On the American Jewish table, you will very frequently find gefilte fish. It is generally a fish that is served cold. It is ground up fish patties, so to speak. And so essentially what it is that you take the meat of the fish, you grind it up with onions, with spices, maybe with some matzah meal and some eggs, something that binds it together. And generally speaking, you would poach that mixture into little quenelles in a fish stock. And then you'd let it chill and you'd serve it with some of the gel from that fish stock.
In 2016, Joel Rose, our colleague at NPR, described your gefilte fish as herby and fresh and not fishy or nothing icky about it. How do you describe the flavor of what you make?
Most Americans who've had gefilte fish have had one kind of gefilte fish, which is from the jar. The flavor of that is going to be predominantly fish and onion. Our gefilte fish that we make actually is a 2-layered gefilte fish loaf. And so on one layer, we're using white fish and pike from the Great Lakes. And on another layer, we're using salmon and steelhead trout. So it's 2 colors. And we don't put any extra herbs in there. And the flavor of that gefilte fish loaf is that predominant onion and fish. But because we're using really fresh, delicious fish, you're not going to get that fishiness, even though it's the flavor of delicious fish. In our cookbook, we have 3 different recipes for our gefilte fish. And one of them, and I'd say it's our most popular recipe, is ground white fish pike, whatever kind of white fish you can find. And we throw a ton of herbs in there. So we'll throw dill, we'll throw parsley, we'll throw thyme. Anything that's fresh, we'll throw into the mix. So it adds color, it adds freshness, and then you have this herby flavor. What I like to think about that particular recipe is that it really tastes like spring, even though it still has that old world flavor of gefilte fish. Many times gefilte fish will have sweetener in it. So you will actually find sugar in gefilte fish, or at the very least in the poaching liquid that you would cook it in. And that is generally the surprise piece of this. And depending on where you are from in Eastern Europe or where your family's from in Eastern Europe, you might have it more sweet or you might have it not very sweet at all. And there's actually a line on the map of Europe that's called the gefilte fish line. If you're further south, right? If you were from further south, what's called like Galicianers, Jews who were from actually present-day Ukraine, southern Poland, they had sugar beet factories there. Everything got a little bit sweet. If you're from further north, Lithuania, you might have a more peppery gefilte fish. So one of the flavor profiles that comes up when you talk to anybody about gefilte fish is, do you like it sweet or you don't like it sweet? And we find that our recipes all have a nice little hedge in the middle.
That all sounds delicious to me, actually. When we first started talking about gefilte fish, you mentioned those jars, and that's what I picture in my head. And this is definitely not that.
No. The jar is a modern invention.
Mm-hmm.
This gefilte fish was so central to the Ashkenazi holiday table. This was such a special dish that as time went on and Jews immigrated to the United States and they were no longer keeping alive fish in their bathtub, they still wanted the gefilte fish on the table. And so you saw commercial production actually patent the gel in the 60s, the synthetic gel, because that was such a part of the experience of eating gefilte fish. So when it got manufactured and you couldn't quite get the gel, you had to have synthetic gel because this dish was important. You know, what is lost in the jar is what's lost in mass manufacturing of any food, right? You know, you cannot possibly maintain quality. You can't possibly source the best fish. It might be on the shelf for 2 years canned, and that's fine. It doesn't mean it went bad, but doesn't mean it's good. You know, I have strong feelings about the jar, but I will say I meet people all the time who love the jar because that's what gefilte fish tastes like to them.
Yeah. What was your connection to Jewish food growing up?
You know, I grew up in Long Island, in the New York metropolitan area. So I grew up with I would just say a strong culture of Jewish food ever present in my life. And I don't come from a long line of cooks at all. You know, there was certainly home-cooked food on the holidays, et cetera, but did not get raised at, you know, my mother and my grandmother's apron strings necessarily. But it was kind of in the air. Whenever there was a special meal, it was generally a Jewish holiday. And on Jewish holidays, we ate Jewish food, right? We ate brisket. We ate roast chicken every Friday night with potatoes. We had challah every Friday. I went to the Jewish Deli every Saturday after synagogue, which is ironic because a lot of people don't go out to eat after synagogue, but we used to go every Saturday. We went to synagogue and we ate at the Jewish Deli. And so I'd have matzo ball soup every Saturday. My dad would have a corned beef sandwich every Saturday. So these foods were kind of they really marked special moments. Jewish food equaled important special moment in life. You know, the holidays are so central to Jewish life. And so if you're living in a Jewish rhythm of life, that every Friday night meal that you have with your family, or in our case, also that Saturday deli tradition after synagogue, every Rosh Hashanah, New Year, Passover Seder. Those were all kind of the high points of the culinary calendar and also the family calendar. So I didn't learn to make most of these foods until I went to college, and I really started cooking for myself, starting when I was about 18 and hosting people and wanting to recreate some of those important moments with friends and family. But even like gefilte fish, which I didn't particularly like, it was part of my DNA from the start.
So for over a decade, you and Jeffrey have been revolutionizing Ashkenazi cuisine. Could you define Ashkenazi for us and describe the cuisine's characteristics?
So Ashkenazi cuisine refers to the food of the Jews of Central and Eastern Europe, Yiddish-speaking Jews. What's interesting is that the origins of Ashkenazi cuisine are actually a little bit further west in Europe, in Germany and northern France. And as Jews migrated east more and more, they integrated foods also from further east, right, from the lands of Russia, Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania. So as Jews migrated to the United States, Ashkenazi cuisine became synonymous or very closely associated with New York Jewish food because so many Ashkenazi Jews, a million Ashkenazi Jews immigrated to New York City, essentially, and to the East Coast between, the 1880s and the 1910s or so. So that food is very closely associated with New York culture and even American Jewish culture, bagels and bialys and even cream cheese, which is an American invention, but very much of the Ashkenazi Jewish world. The characteristics of this cuisine are in some ways defined by the geographies that we're talking about. So in the winter, we're talking about heavier soups and stews, slow cooked foods. In cooking them slowly, you would extract more flavor from them. And so cholent, for example, is a dish that is a traditional dish eaten on Saturday afternoon on the Sabbath. And it's a slow cooked stew with beans and a little bit of barley and some meat and kind of whatever you had, right? And you'd slow cook it overnight and eat it on Saturday. The other characteristic of Ashkenazi cuisine is that in many ways it was defined by poverty. Most Ashkenazi Jews were not wealthy, with plenty of exceptions, but the cuisine was developed in a colder climate, a harsher climate of Eastern Europe, and by people that primarily didn't have abundance. So gefilte fish is a really good example of that. It's a dish that stretches how far one fish can go to feed a family. So if you have one little fish, well, you can't really feed your family a special meal of one little fish, but if you mix onions in and you mix breadcrumbs in and you mix egg in and you mix whatever else filler things that you have in, and then you cook it, and then you actually stuff it back into the skin of the fish, by the way, gefilte means stuffed, then you have a dish that is filling and worthy of the holiday table. So a lot of what defines Ashkenazi cuisine beyond root vegetables and onions and garlic and slow cooking is also this idea of how far can you stretch your resources. So there's a lot of ingenuity. That is one of the really interesting things to learn about. It's also just worth noting that pickled and preserved foods are very characteristic of Ashkenazi cuisine as well, because you have a climate in which your growing season is short if you're in Eastern Europe, right? So you have to take that July cucumber harvest and you need to make it last. And so you're going to pull those cucumbers off the vine, you are going to pickle them immediately, and you're going to eat them all winter because you're storing them in your root cellar. You're going to get every cabbage you possibly can, shred it up, fill your barrels, make really salty sauerkraut so that all winter long you can dig into that barrel and have a vegetable. Funky fermented flavors.
You're making me kind of want to have gefilte fish now. I'm not going to lie. I'm thinking it sounds delicious right now.
Well, then my work here is done.
We have a winner. In your book, you say gefilte fish tells the story of Ashkenazi life in both Europe and North America so well. How so?
So we're looking at the ingredients of gefilte fish. We're looking at the method. It all tells that story and gives a snapshot of that kind of poverty-stricken life that at least my ancestors lived, for sure. My mom always likes to joke that we were like, poor Jews, like Fiddler on the Roof Jews, like there's nothing notable about our history at all. We were just those guys, making it work with gefilte fish. So when you get to North America, what's amazing about gefilte fish is that you saw essentially those small towns of Eastern Europe attempting to be recreated on the streets of the Lower East Side and in the tenements of the Lower East Side. So you would have a woman go down to the market on Wednesday and get the best fish she could live for Shabbat, for Friday night. And she would get that live fish, bring it home in a bucket, keep it in the only bathtub in the tenement, as until she clocked it over the head and made gefilte fish out of it. And there are countless people, I am talking countless people who are alive today who can recall their families having that carp in the bathtub. And that is a classic scenario. You can't even bathe until Friday afternoon because there's a fish taking up your bathtub. And that is because gefilte fish was really important, and preparing for Shabbat and having those special Friday night and Saturday meals was so integral to Jewish life. Even when Jews came to the United States, we're attempting to find the way to hold on to traditions and hold on to what they love to eat in Europe. But then you also see this evolution of gefilte fish. So you see that gefilte fish is now being mass manufactured at a certain point, is starting to be available on a commercial level and not made in every single home. It's also worth noting that at some point over the course of history, Jews stopped stuffing the gefilte fish in the skin of the fish. So gefilte meaning stuffed. At this point, we mostly just eat the stuffing. We do have a recipe in our book for a full stuffed gefilte fish. And there are places like in Brighton Beach where you can still get a gefilte fish the way it used to be. But for the most part, we just eat the stuffing. And that's because as laborious as many, traditional foods are, at a certain point, it became maybe just a bit too laborious to keep that skin and have to perfectly skin the fish in order to stuff it back in.
I mean, as a chef, I have so many questions right now.
Totally.
The fish is in a bucket. Why do we need to put it in the bathtub? Could we just stay in the bucket?
Actually, that's a great question. Maybe it was just too small of a bucket. Google carp in the bathtub. You will not be disappointed.
Yeah. So food shopping is a special part of preparing Shabbat. I mean, taking trips to Brighton Beach or Williamsburg offers that world of incredible Jewish food stories. Describe the experience of shopping in these type of places.
They're also different. I lived for about 5 years in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. And Crown Heights is a particular ultra-Orthodox enclave. And so there's quite a few amazing grocery stores, bakeries, fishmongers. And as somebody who doesn't exactly fit the profile of an ultra-Orthodox Jew, I loved shopping in these stores and getting into the rhythm of Shabbat along with my neighbors. And to me, the biggest characteristic is that starting on about Wednesday night, you can start to feel Shabbat in the air. When you live in a religious neighborhood, there's a certain pep in the step of folks who are shopping, right? You see a lot more shopping bags. All of a sudden, there's challah in the window. So you see these changes starting to happen, and you see people kind of bustling around. And Thursday night, forget it. You can really feel it. So when I lived in Crown Heights, I would sometimes to torture myself, I would go shopping on Friday morning at the grocery store in my neighborhood, the ultra-Orthodox grocery store, which was always just a stupid move, right? It's like, why would I go on the busiest day, when everyone is rushing? But at the same time, that was when you could get the Shabbat specials that they would have in the store. And there was something really fun and special about participating in that energy of Shabbat. And now I live in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, which is on the edge of Williamsburg. And so I have many, many Hasidic neighbors, totally different kind of Jewish community. One thing that I love about what I see in the community here where I live now that I didn't have in Crown Heights is that on Friday morning, flower vendors come out on the street, and they're not there any other day. I love getting flowers from these flower vendors on Friday. And that is just such a shift. Like all of a sudden, this concrete jungle just is blooming with flowers on Friday morning.
Wow. Liz Alpern, thank you so much for spending so much time with us. And I know how busy you are right now. Happy holidays to you. And we really appreciate your time. And good luck with the new baby.
Thank you so much. It'll be her first Passover coming up. So we're excited to introduce her to all the new traditions.
That was Liz Alpern. She's the co-founder of the Gefilteria in Brooklyn, New York, and she's co-author of the book, The Gefilte Manifesto. We'll have a link to both at ctpublic.org/seasoned. I'm Marisol Castro.
And I'm Chef Plum. When we come back, Ryan's Deli in Vernon is a New York-style Jewish deli right here in Connecticut. We talk to its longtime manager about the business and his favorite regulars.
If he wasn't coming in, he would call and tell us because we'd worry about him.
You're listening to Seasoned on Connecticut Public Radio. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Seasoned. I'm Marisol Castro.
And I'm Chef Plum.
If you live in Vernon or any of the surrounding towns, you know Rein's New York-style deli. The deli's been serving up pastrami, knishes, noodle kugel, rugula, brisket, all the classics, for 50 years.
Here are a few more numbers. Every week, the deli sells 800 pounds of rugula and more than 200 sour cream coffee cakes, which are delicious, by the way. In a day, the staff prepares 20 really large pots of sauerkraut to top off their famous pastrami sandwiches. 4,000 to 5,000 people will sit down for a meal at Ryan's this week. And in a year, the deli will sell 100 tons of pickles. You can buy those in buckets if you like.
General manager and partner, Russell DeBella, started as a busboy at the deli when he was just 17 years old. He's been there for 20 years. Chef Plum visited the deli and sat down with Russell, and he asked him to give us some history on how the deli got started.
Bob and Betty Rein and their brother Bernie, Bob's brother Bernie, from Jersey, Elizabeth, New Jersey, and they moved to Connecticut for work. Actually, Bob and Betty came first, and he looked around and said, geez, I can't get a corned beef sandwich anywhere. And his thing was to, bring what he missed to Connecticut, where he lived now. And then he called his brother Bernie, and he came and joined up with them. In 1972, they opened up across the street. And, and it wasn't always a success right off the bat. It took years and years of hard work and networking and promoting and to really get them going. And but again, they put in 17, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week to get the place going, and that's where it started. And from there, things just kept on going and going.
So you talk about a good corned beef sandwich. Like he said, couldn't get a good corned beef sandwich. What makes a good corned beef sandwich? Like, what is that?
It starts with a good corned beef, and years ago, and still to this day, we use Hebrew National corned beef, a kosher corned beef, and it's got great flavor and consistent. It goes from the mustard to the rye bread to the imported Swiss cheese, if you put Swiss on your sandwich, or make a Reuben. It's all those ingredients that you gotta keep your quality ingredients going.
Yeah, you said like a good, I picture a Reuben sandwich being like a good corned beef sandwich. Yeah. Is that what he was referring to when he said he couldn't get a good?
I think a corned beef on rye was his favorite, his go-to, and he's like, and he went to a restaurant and they said corned beef and it was some, frozen product that probably wasn't good or.
Yeah.
To hand slice it, to order, to everything, from the rye bread being artisan baked rye, New York rye, it's everything, So, but, I use corned beef example, but again, from stuffed cabbage to brisket to matzo ball soup, he couldn't get any of his favorites there,
Right.
So they brought it all here.
Well, what makes a great New York style Jewish deli?
I think it's the camaraderie, it's the employee to customer relationships. It's the food from the potato pancakes to a Reuben to the slice of cheesecake. But again, it's how the whole place is run. It's not like a 5-star restaurant where you have everybody's very quiet. It's loud. It's hectic. It's a customer's going to add on a pound of rugula to the order. You can say, yeah, in a minute, I get it. You can have you can have fun with the customers, and they know they like that environment. It's the environment that it makes too. So.
Now, you ever said that to somebody and they're like, "What? Why would you say that?" Like,
I got a lady. Listen, you have someone come and they cut someone in line and say, "Get over there. You're not next." And they laugh about it. They're not gonna get mad. They're used to it. So, but we be respectful. But you got to have fun too.
Of course. So you started here as a busboy at 17.
Yep.
And now you're the co-owner. You've spent 20 of the deli's 50 years. You've been a part of this whole thing.
Yep.
So you're not a family member.
Right.
But what is it about this place that made you decide to spend to make it your career?
The biggest part is the people. It's the employees. It's the customers. It's I built so many relationships, and all my best friends are here. And again, for the customers, it's building relationships. It's rewarding to say, hey, this guy came in last week for the first time, and I gave him a taste of something. He's back. it's really rewarding to
Yeah.
see somebody come back and say, oh, I did that. They wouldn't have maybe came back if you didn't go the extra mile. We hope they would. And with the employees too, everyone is different. Every employee is different. Every employee's got their own issues at home and different things. But here you want to try to make a good environment for them and give them a second home, too. That's important to me. So.
How many things have you changed since, you came in here as a co-owner now?
We started DoorDash, which our partners are very, they're very like kind of old school, and that was a big change, and our customers enjoy that. But no, not too much. I mean, just some menu items here and there, some retail items we've tried, and for example, like our mac and cheese, we sell the mac and cheese dinner. We sell it in the retail case. And I said, our brisket dinners are great. Like, let's sell that, So we end up putting brisket in a pan with gravy and sell it, and people buy them left and right. So it's tough because you gotta keep to you can't change too much. It's not like a regular restaurant. I'm going to put a different chicken dish on the menu, right? But you got to keep to your core, but kind of step out of the boundary a little bit and try to attract some different things. But you got to always keep to what you're.
Keep that core still there.
We could sell spaghetti and meatballs all day long, but again, that's not what we do.
Right.
That's not what we. That's not what our.
Well, 50 years is an incredibly long time for any business, local business, and you don't get that far without having support from the community.
Yeah.
Talk about how the community has supported Rein's and how it plays a big part in the business you do here.
It starts with how we reach out to the community too. How we donate and how we support, and we do everything we can. But it's also getting outside the walls, and that's what I like to do. Is I'm on 3 different boards of directors. You network with people and you meet people, because if someone needs a catering order, they're going to go with the guy they sat with yesterday, they had a good conversation with, than some guy they don't even know. So being outside these walls is the big thing. And for me, learning that what Ryan's Deli was, you think it's just a building, but once you get outside and you hear people talk about it and stuff, it's really amazing. But I think always to be there for the community when you need it, whether it's, during COVID, we donated, I think, over 3,000 meals in sandwich packages, lunches, whatever, to frontline workers, first responders. We were suffering, but they were suffering.
Right.
And we would rather stay suffering, but help them out.
Well, you do it, I'm a chef too, so we do what we do. We make food.
You make food, you make sandwiches, and it's funny. It's like, we could have the worst day ever, and we're short help, we're down people, we're hurting on product. At the end of the day, I just want to sell sandwiches.
Right.
I don't care. I want to make people happy with food. So, but I think the community, you got to be part of the community. You got to be active in the community, and you have to. And you see the community come in here. Local schools order from us, and we do donations for schools. It all goes hand in hand. So it's a partnership.
So, and speaking about the community, and going back to talking about some of those, I'll get it in a minute,
Yeah.
Talk about some of your favorite customers you got here.
I've had many over the years. I had one gentleman who stays dear to my heart. It was Art. Him and his wife came in for many years, and when I was a busboy at 17 years old, they came in for many years, and they came in, they sat at the same table, 8:30 every single day. They got the same thing to eat. And his wife got cancer, and he would come in, they'd sit in the car out front, because they have friends, and they want to talk to, and people watch and say hello to their people. And, then his wife passed, so he started coming in again, And then Art was a great guy. I mean, we would go to his house, we'd rake his leaves, and we all pitched in money to get him an AC years ago, because he didn't want one, but he had a good relationship. When we hit our 40th anniversary, we gave him a care package, like stickers, hats, shirts, all 40th anniversary stuff. We sent. He wasn't going. He was sick at the time, and he wasn't going anywhere. And when he passed away, his son, who I knew he had a son, he called us and he says, "I want to talk to Russ." And I'm talking to him. He goes, "I know everything about you. I know everything about you, your kids, everything." Because Art told him every night about me, because I had and other people too. And when he passed away, he was in his bed and he had his hat right next to him, his Ryan's Deli hat. So again, that's what we meant to him. That's what we try to mean to a lot of people. And I love that story, because now his son and his family, they come through every month now, because they live in Boston, and they, not as often as his dad and his mom, but they carry on. They stop in, they say hello, so it's like full circle. And that's what we meant to him. And geez, we're just selling him oatmeal, rye toast, and egg sandwich sometimes, But we were a lot more to that.
Did Art get the same thing every time he came in?
Yeah, he changed it up. He had about 5 different options.
Yeah.
He did, If he wasn't coming in, he would call and tell us, because we'd worry about him. He would say, he said, I got a doctor to say, guys, I won't be in. Maybe I'll be in for lunch. He would call and tell us that, But we were his home, and especially after his wife died, we were his support system, and he counted on us every day, and we were there. And, we have a lot of customers like that say that, I come here, I get a woman that comes in often, and she says, my son gets so mad at me when he sees my credit card bill. It's all Rein's Deli. But that's what they're doing. And it's good to take care of your new customers, but it's really good to take care of the ones that are there all the time. They're the ones that are going to see you in a snowstorm. They're the ones that are going to see you, during COVID. They're going to get takeout from you. So it's that's my favorite customer story, and I never forget them.
That's 50 years in the industry. That stuff happens. If you've been around for 50 years, those are the stories you get.
Yeah.
And you see generations of families.
And it goes back to, and I worked with Betty and Bernie Rein. Bob passed away in '88, one of the founders. The stories that I've heard from them is that, a guy would drive off the highway and he'd say, hey, geez, listen, I left my wallet, I need gas money. They would go to their pockets and give gas money to people.
Wow.
These are the stories that I've heard, They were very giving, and if somebody had a problem with something, they would fix it. They would fix it immediately. So the thing is, especially with multi-generational businesses, is that as generations change, they don't sometimes have the same mindset. But I worked with them. They were tough business people, but they knew what mattered in the business.
That's great, man. So a great Jewish deli. It's got to have some great comforting foods like matzo ball soup and
chicken pot pie,
and brisket,
mac and cheese, brisket.
What are some of those dishes your customers want as we head into Passover?
Brisket's a big one. Brisket with au jus gravy, which is flourless gravy. We have a veggie matzo kugel. We make our noodle kugel, potato kugel through the year, but we have a veggie matzo kugel. We make a zimmus, which actually is carrots, sweet potato, molasses, maple syrup, brown sugar, and actually we put brisket in it. We just started putting brisket in it. It's fabulous.
So just tell everybody what a zimmus is. I don't think I'm.
Yeah, zimmus is it's a side dish with basically it's a carrot, sweet potato dish. It's a vegetable dish, and now we put some brisket in it. But it's a traditional Jewish side dish for Passover.
And kugel is like that baked matzah. I used
Yeah,
to make a
matzah
peach
meal.
kugel.
Yeah, matzah meal. There's vegetables in it, and
Like
matzah
almost like
meal.
a stuffing kind of.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, pretty similar. Yeah. But it's you pour a little gravy on it. It's fabulous. It's good stuff. And actually for Passover, we make because of the flour, we make a matzah bagel. So we take matzah crackers, matzah meal, and we actually make a matzah bagel, which a lot of our Jewish clientele, they use it for make a sandwich. They'll put a brisket sandwich on a matzah bagel. We do a Ruben on on a matzah bagel and stuff too, and that's pretty popular.
I think a great tip for people going into Passover, maybe who want to make their own gravy, it might be interesting to talk about how to do a flourless gravy, or what you can do with, reducing it down, or adding a cornstarch slurry to it.
Yeah, and ours is pretty simple. Basically it's you let the brisket cook, so all the drippings from the brisket, we use that into the gravy, and we add some seasoning and stuff to it, but there's not much to it really, but there's a lot of flavor.
Yeah.
Off the meat, so.
Well, Russ, thank you so much for having us here. I hope you guys have 50 more years than this. But maybe you won't be here running it for 50 more years.
I'm hoping for at least 40 more.
At least 40 more.
Then I can retire by then.
Well, I'm hoping for at least a corned beef sandwich before I got here. I can't wait to try it.
Definitely.
Thanks, Russ.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
That was Russell DeBella, General Manager and Partner at Rein's New York Style Deli in Vernon. You can see photos of Russ and the deli on our show page. Special thanks to Dave Wurtzel. That's at ctpublic.org/seasoned. I'm Marisol Castro.
And I'm Chef Plum. There's a beautiful flourless chocolate cake recipe from Joan Nathan on our site as well. Perfect for Passover. You'll find it at ctpublic.org/recipes. Seasoned is produced by Robyn Doyon-Aitken, Catie Talarski, and Emily Charash. Our interns are Sara, Gasparotto, and Michayla, Savitt.
Thanks for listening, everybody, and a very happy Passover to all of you who celebrate. Remember, you can catch past episodes of Seasoned on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe and never miss our conversations with people from around the country and in our own neighborhoods, sharing their culinary traditions with us. See you next week.